guys, welcome back. We are on season 2, episode 7. How does a happy teacher make a good lesson? Now, obviously, me and Jenny worked together for a good few years, making a lot of lessons because we were in a growing school, so they literally didn't have any lessons to go from. So we made a lot of lessons. So I feel like we definitely have the right kind of standing to make a judgment of what makes a good lesson because we've made a lot of lessons, and not only that, you've obviously been a head of department for a really long time, and so you observed, I'm sure, a hell of a lot of lessons as well. So I think we really wanted to do this one just to kind of say our opinion on what we think makes a good lesson. So Jenny, over to you with the break time banter.
So hello everyone, nice to be back after my 1 week break after Dan and Roxy did a very good job with the podcast. Yeah, so I like my break-time banter to be very related to the topic. So we're talking about what makes a good lesson. And so mine is to do with a laminator. I think a laminator is a very important tool in what makes a good lesson. And it's also good for sustainability because you keep the same resources year after year and they don't get wrecked or anything. But also, I have been trying to do more and more outdoor lessons. Partly because I want to have more time outdoors and I'm really keen on my kids having more time outdoors. And then I kind of think, why are teenagers constantly having to be sat down in seats indoors? So I kind of just saw what I thought was a great opportunity. I was like, right, I'm going to learn how to use the laminator properly and not have an argument with it. And I was teaching my sixth formers about the Green Party. So I decided to do an outdoor laminated treasure hunt in the pouring rain.
Ooh,
yeah.
I don't know how they would have felt about that.
Wow.
The rain.
So the rain wasn't expected. You know, it wasn't that long ago. It was in kind of April. And as I'm saying that, I'm saying obviously there are April showers, but you kind of think, you know, I'm not doing it in the depths of winter. But I spent so long making this laminated treasure hunt. And I was like saying to myself, I was like cutting the bits. I was like, if these kids don't love this lesson, oh, and I was already finding myself, you know, a bit like before an observation that, you know, you put so much effort into it. And if the kids don't love the lesson, I've actually got a clenched fist right now. It shows how kind of strongly I felt about it. But yeah, I spent so long with this laminator making this huge treasure hunt across the school. And then my sixth formers walk in and they're all just like, oh, like worse than teenagers are normally. Oh, miss, I've had the worst weekend. Oh. And I was like, well, we're going to go do a treasure hunt outdoors. And they all look outside and it's absolutely pouring down with rain. I was like, you've all got hoods. And then we went next door and she happened to be the Duke of Edinburgh coordinator. She's like, I've got some spare umbrellas. So took some umbrellas. And then we did this treasure hunt and it was all kind of in the grounds outside the school. So we could see all these other lessons going on and all the kids were staring like, who are these mad people just running around in the rain? I'd also decided as part of it to get the extra bonus points, they had to find the hidden dinosaur that I'd hidden in a tree. Which, yeah, I'm not sure how relevant that was to, I know I did make it relevant to politics because I was talking about the dinosaurs were the old parties. And they were trying to learn about some of the newer parties. But basically, I was friends with the head of geography and I'd raided their geography department and they just had all these amazing things, like they had toy dinosaurs. And I was like, why did they get to use toy dinosaurs in a geography lesson? And I didn't get to use them in a politics lesson. But anyway, suffice to say, the kids, and I say kids, they're like 17-year-olds, they absolutely loved it. And they came back inside and they were in such a good mood for the rest of the lesson. They were like, that was so much fun just running around in the rain, miss. And now I'd say like once a week, that class, we do an outdoor lesson.
Oh, that's a really good idea. So in the treasure hunt, what did they actually have to find? I'm intrigued.
So they basically had, I gave them like a list of questions that they had to find out about the Green Party. So from finding all the different clues, they had to kind of find the answers to those questions.
Oh, that sounds really fun.
Yeah, so it was I was very aware that I was like, I don't just want to do an outdoor lesson just to do an outdoor lesson. I was like, I want it to be really relevant. So I wanted it to be, you know, finding new knowledge and getting answers to questions. And then when I've like kind of, you know, tested them on that topic, they do still know it really well.
Did you ever, when we were at our old school, did you ever do the lesson on the Battle of Hastings where you went outside and like set them up in their different, like one on Senlac Hill, like
Yeah.
one down the bottom, and like done their tactics and stuff. That was really, I remember doing that. Like taking the history outside
Yeah.
it's fun.
And I
And
think we remember it, don't we? And therefore, like the kids remember it. And I think that's
well,
such a
I'm
good,
all for experiential, like any
yeah,
type of experiential learning. I am definitely for, like, but I've got to say, you've got, I think maybe because you had like 17-year-olds, like it works quite well, but I have had a lesson go terribly wrong, like going outside.
have
And
you?
it's just like reminded me as you were talking about it. So we were doing about renewable energy, and I thought, oh, like in our old school, we had a rooftop. I don't know if you remember. And I was
Okay,
like,
yeah, yeah,
oh,
yeah.
I'll take the kids up onto the rooftop and we can see how much renewable energy we can spot. So, like solar
Ah,
panels,
oh,
wind
that's fun.
turbines, blah, blah, blah. So I was like, oh, this will be really, really fun. But it was like, I want to say it was a year 8 class. So they were pretty young and pretty young. But I was like, all we're doing is going up on the roof. I mean, there's barriers and stuff, so you know, they can't fall over,
Hmm.
like fall off the
I
roof
know
or
in my head
whatever.
was thinking risk
Yeah, I
assessment.
know. Yeah, right. Well, exactly. So I'm thinking, oh, we don't need a risk assessment to go on the roof of the school. Like it's got a garden up there and everything. So people do use it. It's not like it's not
Hmm.
a used
Yeah, you're
space.
not, for anyone listening, you're not just climbing onto some like rooftop
No, no, this
tiles
is
or.
like they use it as a sixth form area actually in the school. So
Hmm.
people hang out outside, they have a garden, they have like all these
Hmm.
kind of bits. So it was totally like a usable area. And I was thinking, okay, we'll go up on the roof. It will only be about 15 minutes. We'll literally spot whatever renewable energy sources we can see. Because I used to teach geography as well. Anyway, we get up there. I'm like thinking, oh my God, this is amazing. The kids are like spotting like wind turbines in the distance, and like they go like, oh look, the solar panels and blah blah blah. So I'm like, oh, this is bringing geography to life. And then a teacher like comes outside because the music staff room was right next to the roof, and they come outside and they're like, I don't know if you know, but a couple of those kids have just thrown rocks over the roof, and like I don't know if they've like hit members of the public. And I was like, what?
Oh my
So
God.
like, obviously I marched the class like downstairs. He tells me which 2 kids he'd seen. I have to like send them to like the isolation room because obviously they've done something really dangerous. And then I basically got told after that yeah, if you want to take them up on the roof again, you have to do like a proper risk assessment. You're gonna have to like take, you know, someone else with you, like a TA or someone. I was like, oh, I was like, so basically they ruined it. They ruined it for every other
Oh, that's so
class afterwards
annoying.
because all the other classes were like asking, oh, the other class got to go on the roof, and I'm like, yeah, sorry guys, I've been banned from taking classes on top of the roof, but it's fine. I still took them outside, just not on the roof, unfortunately, ever again.
Oh,
But
that's
yeah,
sad though, isn't it?
I
Is it because
know.
there are rocks? Are there rocks on the
They were like
roof, or
little
did they?
stones, and so basically
Right.
they'd thrown them. Thank God they didn't hit a member of the public because, but basically because the roof is so big, you know, some of the roof faces the street, and some of it
Yeah.
is like part of our school basically. So they'd thrown it on the side where members of, but they thought it was really funny, and there was also a kid taking a selfie on the roof, like. Which actually relates to our next episode, not this
It
one, but
does. Dangerous
but yeah,
smartphones.
so I had to then confiscate fact. Yeah, it was a bit messy, and I think like I'd romanticized it in my head. I was like, oh, just take them on the roof, like it'll be fine, and it didn't work out too fine. But anyway,
But
what
do you
makes
know
a
what
good?
though? Like obviously the school, yeah, that could have been quite serious, but it just kind of shows that if it was a bit more normalized, like if kids were more used to doing outdoor lessons,
Yeah,
and then maybe, you
yeah,
know, they kind of learn in, I don't know, assemblies, form times about like how to do an outdoor lesson and like what are the responsibilities of it. Like clearly don't throw stones, otherwise you won't be able to do this anymore.
I've
Because
had
I think
some
with
really
this,
good outdoor lessons. So like
yeah.
I know that they can really, really work, and they find them really fun.
And I think
Um,
they just kind of have to get a bit more used to them sometimes, don't they? So with
yeah,
this class that I'm talking about, after that one lesson outdoors, they wanted to do lots more. And I was like, yeah, we can, as long as I can kind of make it work. And I've noticed kind of the first time we've done it after that, when it was just kind of a normal lesson but outdoors, it was a bit kind of, they're a bit giddy. Whereas
mhm.
second time round, third time round, I was like, this is going really, really well actually, because they're used to it. They're used to kind
Yeah,
of because it's just all different, isn't it? So last time, the first few times that we did it after the treasure hunt lesson, we'd found some outdoor seating, because it's quite a small sixth form class. And I think the fact that I was sat on a round table with them, at first, I think they were trying to see me as their equals a little bit. And then I think once they realised, no, Miss isn't going to talk to us like she's our friend, it's still a formal lesson, but just outdoors. I feel like they do it better now, because they're a bit more used to it.
And actually, this leads quite nicely into our episode. Like, I think one of the really key elements of a good lesson is to give them some kind of hook, like make it.
Yeah.
So I don't like this thing of like, you have to make lessons fun. Like, okay, the fun is important. I really do think the fun is important, but I don't think every lesson can be fun per se. I don't know, like how you
Or
want
I
to
guess it's like
kind of
what you
feel it.
think fun is, isn't it? Like, I think this sounds very geeky, but I think if you get kind of go off on a kind of intellectual tangent, and you're making all these links, and you're having this really high level discussion that they weren't expecting to have, I think that's quite fun. Whereas I think some people might think like
Yeah, I
fun
think,
means like all singing, all dancing, I
yeah.
don't know, lots of moving around the classroom. And it's like, oh, you could have a really fun time just having a really interesting like group discussion or.
Yeah, so that's why I think for me, like when you're saying good lesson or whatever, however you want to kind of be, I think like having some kind of hook for, say, for that lesson that you were talking about before, your hook was going outside, and also the treasure hunt, which was also like part of the hook of the lesson. So like something interesting to make them invested in the lesson. So, and it usually has to happen kind of at the beginning, or you have to do something that kind of hooks them in, whether it's a main activity or if it's a starter activity. But yeah, I think for me that's very, very important. And I think when we were planning those lessons in our old school, I always used to try and think to myself, okay, what's gonna like hook them into the lesson? Like whether if it was something, it could have been something really simple, like some kind of like picture activity where they're kind of looking for something, or some kind of, I mean, I like doing games. Like games is one of my kind of thing that I like doing. So anagrams, keyword bingo, like something that just makes them think for, even if it's for 5 minutes, to get their brain kind of started up, because you know what it's like. It depends on what lesson they've come from, what lesson they're going to. I don't know whether it's a period 1 and they're still tired from waking up early, or if it's a
You're
period
right,
5.
and they need a bit of a like a reset, don't they? Like we're now in Roxy's lesson. I remember you used to have that. We all had one, didn't we? That the little book of thunks. Which were kind of, for anyone that's not heard of thunks, they were kind of quite challenging questions that made you think. And they didn't have to be like very, very specifically related to what the lesson was about, but it might just get them thinking in the way that you wanted them to think for that lesson. Or it could be a question that was a little bit related, but it kind of got them to see the lesson topic in a much broader way.
Yeah, and it didn't necessarily even have to relate to the topic of thunk. It can be something that's really like, I think I done one the other day. It was like, if you have £1 million house, does that mean that you're a millionaire? So like something along those lines, of where it's almost a bit philosophical. There's no right or wrong answer to it, but it just kind of gets the juices flowing.
Which is actually, even if it's like not topic related, it is really like skills related, isn't it? Because you're like, I'm going to get you to do some high level thinking in this lesson, so I want you to kind of get your brain in that kind of mindset.
And of course, like something, this is what I mean by the fun element. I think in some lessons you can't do something where, like, you have to do, if you're doing something like essay planning or whatever, but even that, you can actually bring a hook in. Like I've done group essay planning, and the kids actually asked me to do it again. They literally were like, Miss, can we do the group essay planning again? We found that really useful. I'm like, oh, okay. Like they actually want to do essay planning, but they prefer to do it in a different way to just literally sitting down, chalk and talk. Oh, here's an essay title and plan it kind of thing.
Or like, I'm trying to think, when I've kind of done, I don't know, maybe like lower down the school and you're trying to get them to learn how to write a history essay. I quite often do a bit of an essay and I say like Miss Byrne, but I'll purposely make it quite a bad essay. And I'm like, right, find 10 faults with my essay. and they love it. They're like, what, we're allowed to criticize you? And I'm thinking, yeah, this, I could obviously write a better essay than this. This is for your own learning, but yeah, go for it.
Yeah, and then so for me, then another part of a really good lesson or a great lesson is trying to break it down to a child's level. So I often find, I've met some really great teachers because their knowledge is insane, like for their topic or their subject, but they can't seem to break it down into these kind of chunks that feel kind of better in terms of a child thinking. And so because we're not children, so obviously we can have a different type of, but I just think to myself, like, we don't like I don't like learning, just by someone speaking at me for hours or whatever else. So actually a child doesn't like that either. So how can I break it down where they actually get it? So like, even with the group essay writing, before we go into the actual group essay writing stage or the group essay planning stage, how am I chunking that information beforehand? Am I doing some kind of card sort? Am I doing some kind of game beforehand? Am I highlighting information? Like what are we actually doing beforehand? So I think one thing that I really, really got from our old school is having some kind of loose structure to a lesson really made me feel like it would turn into a good lesson regardless, because you've got that kind of nice flow. We always speak about like the golden thread through essays. It's exactly the same through a lesson. So like, how have we got that golden thread? How have we got that flow? I always imagine it like I'm a very visual learner. So for me, it's like, okay, I'm imagining like this thread going through, like, how am I flowing through from the,
I love this. I love the idea that you're at the front of the classroom. You're like, so kids, are you with me?
I
feeling the flow?
You know me very well, and you know that I do the action in front of the clock. In my GCSE lessons, I'm like, guys, you've got to imagine the flow through the essay. Like as the examiner's reading it, are they thinking, oh, this is a very stunted essay, and they're not really like, linking things together, or are they actually feeling the flow like through the essay? It is like that.
I might start saying that in class. I quite like that. I feel like I already do quite a lot of kind of hand actions and things already, but I don't do much of the feeling the flow. I do things like where, and I think it's quite good because I'll get them to do things like, this was going to be one of my break-time banters linked to this particular class. And essentially what it was is that they clearly had been watching my hand movements so much over the 2-year A-level course, because I do this thing where I go da 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 da, and do you know what that means?
Does that represent? No.
So that, and I've just realised I've got paint on me because I've been painting my garden furniture. So sorry. But you do one side of the argument, you do the other, you show that you're fully weighing them up.
Oh, okay.
And then your conclusion is a good evaluative judgment. And they'll know, like, I'll just walk up to them, I'll read the rest, and I'll be like, and they know what they need to do.
For anyone listening on the podcast, Jenny is doing an action with her fingers where she basically is saying one side, other side, link it together. What are you doing? Or
like weigh up the pros and
weighing up the argument. Okay, so like having a balanced argument and then
make sure your judgment is fully
right.
Yeah,
no, absolutely.
And I think that just raises the point that kids, you can't just talk at kids. And that whole thing that everyone knows that, when people talk, so much of it is your body language, isn't it? And things that you're doing with your hands. So it's just being aware that as a teacher, they're watching everything you're doing. And I'm aware that I'm doing it now for anyone that is listening rather than watching. I do move my hands about quite a bit, but I think like kids respond to that because it's just something else to get their attention, isn't it? And it's another kind of visual prompt to try and remember something. So if I'm doing this kind of weighing up both sides of the argument, but actually doing a physical movement with my hands, I feel like it's just another thing that registers in their brain.
Oh, absolutely. Like, I think that's really important. And I actually draw a lot of pictures on, and they're probably really rubbish pictures, but just again trying to visualize. Okay, so for me, obviously, because I teach RE, I have a lot of, it's quite linked to history as well, so like having a lot of like timelines of events and like why they've happened and why one thing links onto the other. So let's say they get asked a question about Jesus, they can think of it in context. Okay, well, this happened before, this happened after, why is this event so important? Because they'll often get asked like an essay question on that. And actually in my little stint of teaching history GCSE, I did a lot of visual stuff as well, because for me, that's how I, for me as an adult learning this stuff from scratch, because if you didn't know, I had to teach history for a year for GCSE, and I wasn't very happy about it, because I think I was I was scared. I was really scared about the knowledge side of things, not the teaching side of things, because like we're talking about today, yeah, me and Jenny, we know what makes a good lesson, like whether it's a history lesson or a RE lesson or a geography lesson, like whatever we used to teach, we still used to have that similar kind of structure flowing through. Obviously, the content would change. And the types of activities. But what I think I liked about our old school, and sorry, this is like obviously coming to the point very, very late, is that we did have a loose structure, but it wasn't so strict that we couldn't kind of come out of it. So like me and one of our old colleagues, like we'd done a lot of experiential learning in RE, and that was absolutely welcomed by the school. So like it wasn't a thing of, oh no, like you're not sticking to the like absolute structure, so you can't do that. It was encouraged to give that hook that we were speaking about at the beginning, but also have that side of things where there is a loose structure. You do kind of know where you're going with the lesson, and the kids kind of know as well. Again, not in terms of activity, but they feel confident that maybe like it's going to flow from a starter to a main activity to a plenary of some sort.
So I was thinking this as well before the podcast about what makes a good lesson, and I was thinking exactly that. Like you want the loose structure of something that, whether you call that a starter, a hook, an initial stimulus material, ISM, and then a main, which within that, and I remember at our old school, it wasn't obviously just one main for 40 minutes. It might be like you're doing an activity and then checking for learning, another activity, consolidate it, and then some sort of plenary, which for kind of non-teachers out there is kind of the bit at the end that kind of fully checks they've understood it. So for history especially, we'd always have a question for the lesson title. So the plenary would be fully checking, have they got a good answer to that question? And I think, you're right, within that, as long as everyone kind of knows the rough kind of structure, the way you choose to get there as a teacher, you should have the creative freedom to do that. So whether you want to do that through experiential learning, whether you think there's actually a really good chunk of the textbook you want them to read and do a kind of comprehension activity. But we've talked about this before, haven't we, where some schools are so formulaic and they say not only must you have a starter, fine, it's good to get them, as we said before, kind of reset for your lesson no matter what's happened before, but some schools will say, and the starter has to be every time 5 retrieval questions. Just like, how boring for everyone. How do you expect teachers to stay in the profession if you're giving them no creativity? And why would any kid, that's not a hook, they know what's happening, they know they've got 5 questions.
It's one of my favorite things about the job is that when you want to, you can absolutely just make a lesson, however you like you had that idea about the treasure hunt, you were like, absolutely, I'm rolling with it,
and it still had a starter, it still had a main, which was the treasure hunt, it then had a consolidation to check their understanding, it had a plenary, so it had all those things. I was just, the way I was going about doing them was a bit different and involved more outdoor time than normal.
And that's why I love teaching the most. And actually, I did really, although it was very stressful, I did really enjoy making all of those lessons. And it pushed me to be so quick with making good lessons as well. Like now, if someone asked me to make a lesson, I'd be like, okay. Like it doesn't even faze me. It does not faze me at all anymore.
Because the rough structure of what works, don't you? And you've got loads of different kind of tools up your sleeve. You're like, I know that this, like a keyword bingo, can be a good activity for this, or
absolutely.
It's kind of your teacher toolkit.
Like recently I done a training for like the ECTs at my school, and we based our training around routines, and I spoke to them about the routines of a good lesson, and like how actually that routine can make you feel so safe as a teacher, but also
and as a student.
And yeah, but
Yeah.
that's what I was going to say. But
Mm.
also as a student, they feel safe in that routine because they know kind of that actually when they go to that teacher's lesson, they know, okay, it's organized. I know that it's going to be, you know, this, and this. Again, they don't know the exact activities, but they just know
Yeah.
that there's going to be this kind of like how whatever you call it, like you said before, there's going to be this start, there's going to be and actually part of that makes them feel really safe and comfortable. And that, you know, again, that's part of a good lesson, isn't it? Like if a kid
giving them some boundaries and you know, it's just I feel like we're kind of talking about parenting a bit here as well, aren't we? Kind of, you know, good child rearing. They want to have boundaries, they want to kind of feel safe, and then within that be given some creative freedoms. And
definitely. And I think, you know, there's so many different parts of a lesson that make it good, and there is no one size fits all. I think that's the most important thing to kind of say, is that you might do a lesson that goes really well for you, but if I was to try and then go and teach that exact same lesson, it might not go as well for me because it's not really my style of teaching.
Exactly.
You know, like you said, I'm very kind of like handsy, like with my descriptions of things. I draw things. Like other teachers are not into that kind of thing at all. I remember, like, I used to include a lot of kind of like the kids could, you know, write a script for something or act something out. And I remember one of our old colleagues used to be like, oh my God, I always used to scrap that bit of the lesson and do something completely different. Because he would be like, yeah, it works for you, but for me,
that's your
I just don't
personality
really,
and your
I don't really like doing that type of thing. I'm like, okay, that's fine. That's absolutely
so
fine.
I've had quite an interesting thing recently where, so when we were talking about this kind of loose structure of a lesson, I've been doing this thing called an elective. So it's not a discrete subject like history or politics. It's a separate subject that sixth formers do to kind of add to their repertoire. And it was called dinner party discussions. And the idea was kind of getting them ready for any university interviews. But I kind of sold it to them as like, out argue your mum and dad at the dinner table. So we'd look at kind of current affairs, and it was a way of kind of making sure they were up to speed with current affairs, but also that they knew how to kind of recognize different sides of the argument and biases and things. So I did it as instead of kind of starter, main, desserts, it's called dinner party discussions. I had an amuse-bouche, I had a starter, I had a palate cleanser, I had a main, and I had a dessert. But essentially, it was still that structure of what makes a good lesson. So the amuse-bouche was the initial stimulus material. So maybe like a controversial statement or, you know, some images or just something a bit different. Then the start would be the first kind of thinking question related to the topic. Quite often, because they're all obviously same age, living in the same part of London, they all have quite similar kind of political views or views on climate change and all the things we discuss. So they'd all be kind of going one way with the discussion. So then the point of a palate cleanser, a bit like an actual palate cleanser, is to try and kind of take that away. And then with the palate cleanser, it was then try and see the other side of the argument. So try putting yourself in someone else's shoes. So why might someone completely disagree with you? Then we'd have some sort of main activity and consolidate it. And then the dessert was the plenary. But what I was going to say is this term, what's actually happened is myself and another teacher who ran a different elective, we've actually merged them together. So she was doing a whole thing on cancel culture, and I was doing these dinner party discussions. So we merged it into dinner isn't cancelled. And what's been really interesting is that obviously we do have different styles of doing things. So we co-planned the lessons. And then what we've done is we've kind of taken it in turns for who kind of leads on the planning of a particular lesson. And then what we've kind of learned, we're quite early in, we've only done kind of 4 lessons together, but we're kind of seeing, oh, this person feels a bit more comfortable with this way of doing it, or it's just been really interesting because it's not often something you do. Like I did it a little bit back when we worked together because I was training up the new history teachers. So I did a bit of co-teaching, but obviously that was very different because I was kind of her mentor, whereas this woman's, you know, another qualified teacher, and we're trying to kind of work together. And it's just really interesting to kind of check yourself a bit because the very first lesson.
Like so you obviously arrange time where you can actually kind of co-plan together.
So we were lucky in that when the elective happens, there were
Yeah.
2 weeks when the year 12s were doing exams. So we just
Okay.
put that time aside when we would have been teaching that elective and
that's-
use those
yeah,
2
yeah.
hours to co-plan.
That's lovely because you actually got time to
Yeah.
really kind of think about how you wanted to do things. But yeah, I've not done a lot of co-teaching. I've done it in the past. I've not done it recently. But yeah, it's interesting because obviously you do realise that teachers have different styles. And I think this leads very nicely into my get in the bin.
Yeah.
So my get in the bin actually links to a point that you just made earlier, that for me, something I'd love to kind of just completely and utterly throw away, and something that I did experience in my old school, but when the head teacher changed over, was the formulaic lesson plans. So essentially we got told, this is what you need to do for every starter. You need to do a low stakes test for every single starter. There is no room to do anything else. So I was like, but what if I want to do, I don't know, like a picture starter? No, absolutely not. Like, you're not allowed. And then when you got observed, they'd be like, okay, so your low stakes I remember this one observation. They were like, your low stakes test lasted for 10 minutes and it should have only been 5. And I was like, but it was a test and it was a GCSE class, and I didn't want to not give them the like correct answers, you know, address misconceptions, all of those types of things. So like, actually what you're saying to me is, do a low stake. You have to do a low stakes test for every single starter, even though that is like literally the most boring thing ever. I mean, yeah, okay, there's a place for low stakes tests, fine, but not every single lesson.
And there's a place for that teacher with that class to know where that place is.
Yes, exactly. And also, can I just add that a low stakes test doesn't need to be at the beginning of the lesson either.
It doesn't.
It could be in the middle of the lesson. It could be at the end. It could be like AFL, like it could be a cold call in low stakes test. It doesn't necessarily need to be something that is like a question answer, which
and
is
it could
involve
images. You could be using images as a way of doing a low stakes quiz, because you could be kind
whiteboard,
of seeing, do they recognize what the image relates to? Or
absolutely, it can be so many different things. It doesn't necessarily have to be so formulaic that you have to do it. And the worst thing was that they dictated the whole rest of the lesson as well. I mean, it was literally I think if I was to reveal what they'd done, it would literally reveal the school. But they had a literal, this is what you were doing step by step. It took the autonomy out of my lesson completely, which I absolutely hated, because, you know, oh God, so what if I want to do a keyword bingo? God, the kids love keyword bingo so much.
And it is retrieval. It is exactly, and it is checking that they've remembered some key words and that they know what they mean. And
I've got to say, we weren't like, because obviously we were part of an academy chain, and there's many of these schools, so it's not like just, you know, a small mat or something like that. There were some really bad horror stories that we heard from other schools as well. So there was one school, I remember, they said a bell used to ring, okay, in the lesson, and I think it was like 20 minutes in or something like that. And when that bell rang, the kids needed to basically drop everything and write for 20 minutes. So basically the whole school would be doing the exact same thing. I know. Bad. So when you talk about formulaic, it does, you know, people are doing this in schools. There are schools that are super strict with their structure, to the point of it just felt like you were a robot. It just felt like you were a robot. When you say that, robot, it's
so short-sighted. It's this idea that they'll think, oh, we're creating a standard of lessons, and if we've got lots of new teachers, it's a support for them. And it's like, no, just be honest with yourself. You don't trust your staff. You don't trust them.
You don't. Yeah, basically it was a trust thing. Absolutely a trust thing.
And also it's a really bad idea, because you might think you're creating this base level of decency in lessons, but I bet they've got big teacher turnover.
Oh, they've got massive teacher turnover. Yeah, the year I left, they lost 39 members of staff. 39. So yeah, and a lot of that was to do with this fact of them
Because
bringing
teachers
in.
are creative. Like teachers
Yes.
want, like you're partly a teacher because you're creative and because you kind of like being your own boss and you like don't like being told what to do.
And I went to my new school, and I was like, I think I had some kind of PTSD from being at that school for a couple of years, where it was this, kind of formulaic idea, and you felt like you were like fighting against the machine, basically. And you were fighting a losing battle because no one was ever going to listen to your creativity, because they didn't want that. And I went to my new school, and they basically left me to it. They were like, yep, off you go and teach. Like, we saw you in, they saw me in, like, obviously an interview, and that was it. And they literally didn't observe me for the year, because I think there was like something where they because it was after COVID, and they just didn't want to, feel like teachers were under too much pressure. And yeah, I literally I teach how I like. No one ever says to me, you must do this. There are suggestions. There is
Yeah.
CPD for
Yeah.
teachers. And
obviously in your interview lesson, they saw that you know how to teach a good lesson. You understand the basics and the loose structure. And
yeah, and also, not only that, they knew that I'd been teaching a very long time, and they just trusted me to teach. And then when I think they started obviously talking to the kids,
they'll find out
and
that
stuff
way.
like that,
Yeah.
then they were like, oh, she's fine. Like, and then my results at the end of the year, and like everything was fine, and they've left me to it. And I've been there 2 years now, and I feel more free in this school than I've ever felt before, because I think even in the school that when we were under the head teacher we were both under, we did still have kind of stipulations of what we kind of needed to do, whatever, but we did have the creativity, and that's, for me, that's one of the main things of a good lesson, and that's one of the main things of me being a good teacher. And I think that's probably a nice way to end this episode. So join us next week for talking about phones.
It's a topic very close to my heart. It's all about how smartphone-free schools make good schools and make happy teachers.
Yeah. All right. Thanks, guys.
All right. See you. Bye.